Imagine a land vast and wild, forests stretching endlessly, rivers untamed, and skies that watched over ancient civilizations long before the first European ever set foot on its soil. A land not discovered but already alive, with stories, traditions, and people who called it home for thousands of years. But then came the sails, the ships, the outsiders, and history changed forever. This is the beginning of the story of the United States of America, but not the version written in dusty textbooks. No, this is the real story, filled with ambition, survival, conflict, and revolution. The land before Columbus, long before the world called it America, this continent was home to millions of Native Americans. Powerful civilizations like the Aztecs in Mexico, the Inca in South America, and the Mississippian cultures in North America had already created sophisticated societies, with trade routes, city-states, and spiritual systems. Tribes like the Iroquois, Cherokee, Sioux, and Navajo thrived across what is now the United States. They hunted, farmed, built, and governed themselves, with knowledge passed down through generations. This was not an empty land waiting to be discovered. It was a continent already full of life and legacy. 1492. The world collides in 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's how the rhyme goes. But what really happened? Christopher Columbus, sailing for Spain, landed in the Caribbean, not the US mainland. But his voyage sparked a wave of European exploration. Soon after, Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands began racing to claim parts of the New World. They brought with them not just dreams, but diseases, guns, and greed. Native populations were devastated, entire cultures erased. Still, this was the age of empires. And England had its eyes on the east coast of North America. 1607. Jamestown and the birth of English America, the first permanent English colony. Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. It was brutal: starvation, conflict with local tribes, disease. Most settlers died within the first year. The survivors stayed, driven by the promise of land and wealth. More colonies followed. Plymouth, 1620. Founded by the Pilgrims, escaping religious persecution in England. Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, Maryland, and more. By the late 1600s, 13 British colonies were forming along the Atlantic coast, each with its own government, beliefs, and identity. They were British, but not for long. The seeds of revolution, as the colonies grew stronger, so did their sense of independence. But across the ocean, King George III and the British Parliament saw the colonies as a source of money. After all, wars weren't cheap, especially the 7 Years' War, which left Britain in debt. So Britain did what empires do: taxed the colonies without asking their opinion. The result? The Stamp Act, 1765, taxed paper goods. The Tea Act, 1773, taxed tea and led to the Boston Tea Party, where angry colonists dumped an entire shipment of British tea into the harbor. The intolerable acts, punishments that only made Americans angrier. The slogan of the day became, "No taxation without representation," 1775. The revolution begins. On April 19, 1775, the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolutionary War had begun. Ordinary farmers called Minutemen faced off against the mighty British Redcoats. George Washington, a former British officer, was named commander of the Continental Army. It was an uphill battle. Britain was the strongest empire in the world. The colonies were under-equipped and divided, but what they had was purpose. 1776. Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. The colonies declared their independence. Thomas Jefferson penned the Declaration of Independence, a bold document that shook the world. It began with words that still echo through time. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." This was more than rebellion. It was a vision for a new kind of nation, one not ruled by kings but by the people. The war for freedom, the war dragged on. Cities were burned, lives lost, loyalties tested. Then, in 1781, the tide turned. At the Battle of Yorktown, with help from France, Washington's army surrounded British General Cornwallis. The British surrendered, The colonies had won. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain officially recognized the United States of America. A new nation, a new experiment victory was just the beginning. Now came the harder task, building a country from scratch. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution, a blueprint for a democratic republic. A system of checks and balances, a president, a Congress, a Supreme Court, and in 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. Voiceover ending cliffhanger for next part, but freedom was not for everyone. Slavery still existed. Women couldn't vote. Native lands were still being taken. Tensions between North and South were just beginning to rise. The United States had been born, but its growing pains were just getting started. The war was over. The flag was raised. The United States had won its independence. But beneath the surface of this new republic, storms were brewing. How do you unite a country made of former colonies, each with different economies, beliefs, and visions of freedom? And how long can a nation built on liberty ignore the chains of slavery? Welcome to the next chapter in America's story, where ideals are tested, brother fights brother, and the future of the republic hangs by a thread. The growing nation after independence, America began to stretch its arms. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a historic move, the Louisiana Purchase, buying over 800,000 square miles of land from France. It doubled the size of the U.S. Lewis and Clark explored this new frontier, encountering native tribes and mapping the vast unknown. The dream? Manifest destiny. The belief that it was America's destiny to expand westward coast to coast. But with expansion came conflict, especially over one issue that refused to die. Slavery, the deep divide. North versus South America was growing, but not equally. The North became industrialized, built on factories, railroads, and cities. The South remained agricultural, powered by cotton plantations and slave labor. Slavery wasn't just a Southern issue, it was tied to the entire economy. But morally, politically, and socially, it divided the nation. Every time a new state joined the Union, the question echoed, will it be free or slave? The House divided. In 1820, Missouri Compromise tried to balance things, allowing Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. But the peace was temporary. Debates grew louder. Activists like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth became voices against slavery. The Underground Railroad helped thousands escape to the North. Then came 1852, and the book that shook the nation. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, exposing the horrors of slavery to the masses, in the words of President Lincoln. So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war. The election that changed everything in 1860. A tall, bearded lawyer from Illinois was elected president. Abraham Lincoln, a man who opposed the spread of slavery, became the 16th president of the United States. The reaction? The South exploded. 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America, with their own president, Jefferson Davis. And on April 12, 1861, the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter. The American Civil War 1861-1865. Brother fought brother. Towns were turned into battlegrounds. Over 600,000 Americans died, more than in any other U.S. war. Major events. Battle of Gettysburg, 1863, the turning point. Union forces stopped the Confederate invasion. Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln declared all slaves in Confederate territory free, shifting the war's goal from unity to freedom. Sherman's March to the Sea. Total war tactics that crushed Southern infrastructure. In 1865, as the Union closed in, the Confederacy collapsed. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The war was over. The Union was preserved. But tragedy followed quickly. The death of a president. Just 5 days after the war ended on April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated while watching a play at Ford's Theater. His killer, John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. Lincoln became a martyr for freedom. Dream, a new birth of freedom. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, lived on in American memory. Reconstruction, healing, or hurting. Now came the hardest chapter. Rebuilding the South and integrating millions of newly freed slaves into American life. This era. Reconstruction 1865 to 1877 brought big changes. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all born in the U.S. 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. But progress came with resistance. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan rose, using terror to suppress black citizens. Jim Crow laws soon spread across southern states, creating racial segregation that would last nearly a century. The North grew tired. Federal troops were pulled out of the South, and the promise of equality faded into the shadows. The industrial boom while the South struggled, the North boomed. America entered the Gilded Age. Railroads, steel factories, oil empires. Inventors like Thomas Edison brought electricity to cities. Businessmen like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan built monopolies, becoming the richest men in history. Millions of immigrants poured in from Europe, chasing the American dream, landing at Ellis Island, gazing at the Statue of Liberty with hope. But behind the glamour was poverty, child labor, and corruption. Voiceover ending set up next chapter. The United States had survived Civil War, expanded its reach, and become an industrial power. But across the ocean, bigger storms were gathering. A war was coming, one the whole world would fight. In Part 3, we explore how America faced World War I. It battled the Great Depression and emerged as a global superpower after World War II. The factories were humming. The cities were glowing. The American dream was alive, or so it seemed. But deep beneath the surface of booming industry and glittering skylines, the United States was heading into its darkest hour. A war to end all wars, stock market collapse, breadlines and broken spirits. And finally, a second world war that would pull America into the deadliest conflict in human history, change the world forever. This is the story of how the United States faced global chaos, survived total collapse, and emerged as a superpower unlike any the world had seen. World War I. A reluctant entry, the First World War erupted in 1914. But the U.S. tried to stay neutral. President Woodrow Wilson promised to keep America out of European conflicts, but neutrality didn't last. German submarines, U-boats, attacked American ships. The Zimmerman telegram revealed Germany, asking Mexico to attack the U.S. American patience ran out in 1917. The U.S. entered the war. Over 4 million Americans were mobilized. They fought in the trenches of Europe, facing gas attacks, machine guns, and horrors unknown to modern warfare. By 1918, the Allies had won, and America's role helped tip the scales. The aftermath and the League of Nations after the war, Wilson dreamed of peace through cooperation. He helped create the League of Nations, a global group meant to prevent future wars. But there was a twist. The U.S. Senate refused to join. Americans were tired. They wanted to focus inward on jobs, families, and prosperity. And so began a new chapter, the Roaring Twenties. The 1920s were wild, stylish, rebellious. Jazz music filled the air, flappers defied old traditions. Radios and movies became household staples. Skyscrapers rose in cities like New York and Chicago. The economy soared. Cars, especially the Model T by Henry Ford, transformed how Americans lived. But beneath the glamour, warning signs were flashing. Banks were risky. The stock market was a game. Wealth wasn't reaching everyone. And then it all came crashing down. It's the Great Depression, 1929 to 1939. In October 1929, the stock market crashed. Banks failed. Businesses shut down. Families lost everything. Unemployment soared to 25%. Lines for soup stretched 4 blocks. Farmers lost their land to dust storms. In what became known as the Dust Bowl, America was in crisis. Then came a new leader, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. In 1933, Roosevelt took office and promised a New Deal, a massive program to rebuild America's economy and restore hope. He launched Social Security for the elderly, public works programs to build roads, bridges, and schools, banking reforms to protect savings, labor protections for workers. FDR spoke to the nation through his calming fireside chats on radio, rebuilding public trust one word at a time. Slowly, painfully, America began to recover.
Ow.
But across the ocean, darkness was rising again. World War II begins in 1939. Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. The world was at war once more. America tried to stay neutral, but sent aid to Britain and the Allies. Then came December 7th, 1941. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, killing over 2,400 Americans. The next day, the U.S. declared war. World War II. Total war. America mobilized like never before. 16 million soldiers served. Women entered factories by the millions. Symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, industry boomed, producing tanks, ships, and planes at record speed. Scientists raced to develop new weapons, including the most terrifying one ever created, the atomic bomb. The U.S. fought on two fronts. In Europe, against Nazi Germany. In the Pacific, against Japan. In 1944, American and Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day Day, a turning point in the war. In 1945, the Allies reached Berlin. Hitler committed suicide. Germany surrendered. But Japan fought on. Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Under President Harry Truman, the U.S. dropped two atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima and another on Nagasaki. Over 100,000 people were killed instantly. Japan surrendered. World War II was over. America stood victorious, haunted by the power it had unleashed. A new world order. The world had changed. Europe was in ruins. The Soviet Union had grown powerful, and the United States stood tall as the leader of the free world too. Global powers now faced off in a new kind of conflict, one without bombs or bullets, but full of tension. The Cold War had begun. The United States had survived war, depression, and destruction. Now it would face a different kind of battle, ideological warfare against communism. At home, the civil rights movement was just beginning, and space itself would become the next frontier. Two superpowers, one planet, no trust. The bombs were silent now, but the tension was electric. As the smoke of World War II cleared, a new kind of war began, not fought on battlefields, but through espionage, ideology, and fear. The United States and the Soviet Union stared each other down, each armed to the teeth, each believing the world had to choose a side. But while the Cold War raged abroad, another battle was being fought at home, for equality, justice, and the true meaning of American freedom. This is the story of how America was shaped by pressure from within and without, and how it rose, stumbled, and redefined its place in the modern world. The Cold War begins after World War II. Europe was divided. Western Europe leaned toward democracy and capitalism. Eastern Europe was dominated by the Soviet Union and communism. In 1947, President Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine, pledging to stop the spread of communism anywhere in the world. This was the beginning of the Cold War, a decades-long geopolitical standoff between the US and the USSR, arms race, and nuclear fear. Both superpowers began stockpiling weapons, especially nuclear bombs. 1952. The US detonated the first hydrogen bomb. 1953. The USSR followed by the late 1950s. Both had enough nukes to destroy the world several times over the threat of mutually assured destruction. MAD kept the world in a terrifying balance. Americans held nuclear drills. Families built bomb shelters. The shadow of nuclear war loomed over every decision. Proxy wars and global chess instead of fighting directly. The US and USSR backed opposite sides in regional conflicts. Korea 1950 to 1953, a brutal war that ended in stalemate, with North and South Korea still divided today. Vietnam 1955 to 1975, one of America's most controversial wars, costing over 58,000 American lives and dividing the nation. Cuba 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly brought the world to nuclear war, until a tense standoff ended with the USSR pulling missiles out of Cuba. This was a chessboard of ideology, the real lives at stake in every move. The space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite, into space. America was shocked and humiliated. In response, the US founded NASA and poured billions into science and technology. By 1969, the world watched as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, uttering, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." America had won the space race, a symbolic victory in the Cold War. The Civil Rights Movement, while America projected power abroad, it faced serious injustice at home. For over a century, Black Americans had lived under Jim Crow laws, facing discrimination, violence, and inequality. In the 1950s and 60s, brave individuals rose to challenge the system. Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat. Martin Luther King Jr. led peaceful protests. Preaching nonviolence and love, Malcolm X demanded dignity and self-respect by any means necessary. Freedom riders. Sit-ins and marches became the voice of a generation. In 1963, Dr. King delivered his legendary speech, "I Have a Dream." It moved the hearts of millions and changed the soul of the nation. Landmark civil rights laws. The protests led to real change. Civil Rights Act 1964 outlawed segregation in public places. Voting rights. Act 1965 protected the right to vote for Black Americans. Fair Housing Act 1968 ended discrimination in housing, but the road wasn't smooth. Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, sparking nationwide riots. The dream lived on, but the fight was far from over. America in the 1970s. Division and distrust. The Vietnam War dragged on, and with it came doubt. Millions protested. Television brought the horror into American living rooms. Then came Watergate, a political scandal that exposed corruption at the highest levels. In 1974, President Richard Nixon became the first U.S. president to resign. Faith in government was shaken. The American people were tired of war, lies, and division. The Reagan era and the end of the Cold War. In 1981, Ronald Reagan became president. Former actor with bold charisma, he brought a new energy to America, ramped up military spending, and called the Soviet Union an evil empire. In 1987, standing at the Berlin Wall, he made a powerful demand. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And in 1989 it happened. The Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. The Cold War was over. America had not only survived, it had won. The 1990s, innovation and global influence. The 90s were a time of peace, prosperity, and tech revolution. The internet entered homes. Silicon Valley became a global innovation hub. Bill Clinton led the country through economic growth and global diplomacy. Pop culture exploded. From Hollywood to hip-hop, America entered a new millennium as the undisputed global superpower. But peace would not last long. As the world watched America dominate the global stage, a new enemy was lurking in the shadows. One morning in September would change everything. Forever. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. Planes were taking off. Offices were opening. Coffee was brewing. And then, the unthinkable. At 8:46 a.m. on September 11, 2001, the first plane hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. By 10:30 a.m., both towers had collapsed. The Pentagon had been attacked. A fourth hijacked plane had crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. America, the most powerful country on earth, was under attack, and nothing would ever be the same again. 9/11. A nation in shock, the world watched in horror. Nearly 3,000 innocent people died that day. The attackers were Islamist extremists from the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. Led by Osama bin Laden, for the first time since Pearl Harbor, America had been attacked on its own soil. Fear gripped the nation, but so did unity. Flags flew, churches filled, strangers hugged in the streets. President George W. Bush stood on the rubble and declared, "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. The people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon." The war on terror begins, America responded swiftly. Afghanistan War 2001. Goal: remove the Taliban, who were harboring bin Laden. U.S. forces invaded in October 2001. The Taliban was quickly overthrown, but a long war began. Iraq War 2003. President Bush claimed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. WMD's U.S. invaded Iraq. Hussein was captured and executed. No WMDs were ever found. The war became deeply controversial and destabilized the region. These wars would last 2 decades, cost trillions of dollars, and reshape global politics. Homeland security and fear at home. Back home, things changed forever. The Department of Homeland Security was created. TSA screenings made airports stricter. The Patriot Act expanded surveillance, praised by some, feared by others. Muslims and people of Middle Eastern descent faced discrimination. Many Americans supported the wars. Others protested them fiercely. The fear of terrorism became part of everyday life. The Great Recession, 2008. In 2008, America faced a new kind of crisis, not from war, but from Wall Street. A housing market collapse triggered the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Major banks failed, millions lost homes and jobs, global economies were shaken. President Barack Obama, elected in 2008, inherited the crisis. He passed a massive stimulus bill and bailed out the auto industry, helping the economy recover, though not without criticism. A historic presidency. Barack Obama in 2008, America elected its first black president. Barack Obama, a senator from Illinois, inspired hope and broke barriers. Affordable Care Act. Obamacare expanded health care, ordered the raid that killed Osama bin Laden in 2011 advocated for climate action, LGBTQ rights, and diplomatic solutions abroad to millions. He represented progress. To critics, he represented too much government power. Still, his election marked a turning point in American history. Division and the rise of populism. After Obama's 2 terms, the country remained divided. In 2016, businessman and TV personality Donald Trump won the presidency in a shocking upset against Hillary Clinton. Trump's presidency, 2001-7-2021, was fiercely nationalistic, America first, anti-immigration, travel bans, border wall, economically aggressive trade war with China, challenging traditional alliances like NATO. He communicated directly with Americans via Twitter, bypassing traditional media. Trump inspired passionate support and equally passionate resistance. His presidency saw impeachment twice, racial protests, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, deep political polarization, the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020. In early 2020, a new threat emerged, not political, but biological. The COVID-19 pandemic swept the world. Over 1 million Americans died. Lockdowns, school closures, and economic shutdowns changed. Daily life hospitals were overwhelmed. Vaccines were developed at record speed. Became politically divisive. The pandemic tested American leadership, science, and unity, revealing cracks in its health systems and public trust. In a tense and historic election during the pandemic, Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump. Biden promised unity, healing, and a return to normalcy. But the aftermath was chaotic. On January 6, 2021, a mob of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol, trying to overturn the election results. It was the first attack on the Capitol since 1814. Lawmakers were rushed to safety. The world watched in shock. America's democracy, once seen as a global model, looked vulnerable. Today's America, challenges and crossroads as of now, America remains powerful, but deeply divided. It faces political polarization between left and right, racial and cultural tensions, misinformation in the digital age, climate change and natural disasters, global competition, especially with China. Economic inequality and housing crises at the same time. It's a nation of innovation, AI, space exploration, medicine, free speech and creativity, diverse voices, and resilient communities. The dream of America.
Us.
But it's being tested like never before. From 13 colonies to a global superpower. From slavery to civil rights. From isolation to global leadership. From the ashes of war to the dawn of space. America has never stopped evolving. It is not a perfect nation, but it is a powerful idea that freedom matters, that change is possible. The people have the power to shape their destiny, and that is the ongoing story of the United States of America.